Good morning, Suzuki Science. So I just wanted to recap last week's question of the week, and I'm really impressed. Let's say that. You guys are, as a class, as a group, are very good at looking at pictures and determining what those pictures represent. Your critical analysis of information on the internet is impressive. So as I put on a number of these graphics here, and I asked you to determine something about the graphic, many of you were not just close, you were precise. So in this first graphic, what you're doing in these graphics, if you do critical analysis, you typically, in most cases, it's already setting in a context that you know that this picture is not exactly the way it looks. So for a casual observer who's maybe really young, they'll look at the white stuff and they'll think snow, but then there's a dissonance happening because the people and how they're dressed and the road structure behind it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So as you do a little bit more analysis, and some of you might be familiar with these scenarios as well from previous history, that it's not exactly as it appears. So if you look closely, you'll notice that the women are offering prayers to the sun god in this river, a dying water body in Delhi, and it's for a very specific festival. And you'll see how they are dressed. That's clue number one. Clue number two, when you look at the body behind them, you might be able to determine it's a river. And if you know any history about the area, this river, and some of you said this, is overpolluted. You even see this in Toronto area. Some rivers, when they become very turbulent, the pollution inside of it causes this white flotsam to occur. And the public health emergency was declared in New Delhi, where the air quality index topped the charts this week with the worst numbers seen in over 3 years. So this is actually from last summer. But I remember we had a video conference with a school from this region last year as well, and they had to cancel it because the schools were closed because the air pollution was so bad. The National Green Tribunal has been asked to explain why the river is frothing and to hold the factories responsible for doing this accountable. So we'll see what happens there. The next article, this one here, so you guys indicated immediately that this was an immigration center, so excellent. Migrant detainees at the Border Patrol Detention Facility in Texas are packed together in what the Department of Homeland Security's Officer of Inspector General has called dangerous overcrowding. So imagine this during a place where we're supposed to be social distancing. This is in the span between March and April. U.S. Representative who recently visited the site said the migrants were being treated like cattle, not as human beings, which is obvious when you look at the picture. This is not humane. Toiletries and toilets are limited, and the detainees have very little privacy. So you can see the toilet facilities there with the baby bottles and water and all that spread around the toilets. That's not clean. And many detainees lack blankets and other basic necessities. Officials have reported outbreaks of chickenpox, flu, measles, and other contagious diseases, not to mention COVID. We're also seeing the same situation occurring in many of the jails around North America, around the world. In this one here, once again, oops, goes back to. So as you look very closely, initially it's a little bit dissonant. What's happening, you see green on one side and you see blue on the other in a body of water. And I'd encourage you, as you hear these, do a little bit of research and get some of the other, this is a bird's eye picture, but take some of the other photos and articles. There's a really good news serial that talks about this particular dissonance between the have and have-nots. And it kind of alludes to the question of the week this week. I'm not really focusing on have and have-nots, but how much does where you are raised, specifically within the community of Brampton or the Greater Toronto Area or Ontario, how much does that influence your opportunities? So here you have this apartment complexes, there's lots of green around it. You're going to run into movie stars, Bollywood stars, they say, if you're in this area, or big sports stars or people who are very affluent. And then here you have this road, and this road divides. There's a saying, the other side of the tracks. And if you say someone's up from the other side of the tracks, in some cities around the world, and this is more of a American slang, that on one side of the tracks, it's affluent, very well off, anything you want, you buy. Other side, poverty, homelessness, eating food that's bland and likely not very nutritious, the other side of the tracks. And so there's a number of cities around the United States specifically where the track is the dividing line between the affluent and the not affluent. So this is your Google search term. I can't pronounce the word, Marg, a road that separates the slums from the Bandra high-rises and leads to one of Mumbai's most worshipped temples. So I did look at these, and it's a pretty remarkable temple, but seeing this divide between one side and the next, it's sad to see that. And so it talks about the slums here. You'll see slums, if you look at Rio, you'll see a slum that's very similar, that's set on the hills. It's in a lot of movies, Fast and the Furious, you might have seen that in some of the movies. 700,000 people live in this small little area. And that's pretty remarkable that there's that many people packed together. How do you socially isolate distance in these conditions? The book Behind the Beautiful Forevers, I've read that. It's a good book for those of you who like to read and learn a little bit more about the realities of people in other parts of the world. It's a fictional novel, however, it is based on a very real situation. So I learned much by reading that book. And the Mithi River, if I pronounce that correctly, a strip of blue from the distant balconies of the apartment blocks, but a filthy garbage dump slum. If you Google this again and take a look at some of the close-up photos of this, it's garbage. It's garbage everywhere, right? So once again, it's a sad testament to how we treat societies and how populations have to come together in certain ways in order to survive. I encourage you to take a look at that. So some of you indicated that this was this region and that there was a big divide between the slum and the affluent area, and you were correct. And this last one, only a couple people answered because I did put this very late in the day. And Ava, you were correct. Yeah, you think you're the only one who talked about this one. So this is a art submission, and there's a whole bunch of recycling and garbage that was put into the shape of a whale, and really it's a shout out to let people know that there's an issue with the environment, and it's I think it's pretty effective, right? So as we look at these stats here, we know these stats already. This has been something we talked about in school. You've seen it on the media lately if you follow anything to do with the environment, sustainability, even climate, right? Each year, at least 8 million tons of plastic go into our oceans. The number, 8 million, 7 million, 9 million, it's all the same. It's a lot of plastic garbage. The other part was I asked you to share some articles, right? So as I scrolled through here, again, if you have not had a chance to read through other people's stories, that's the reason why we're doing this question of the week, is to have a community of students from David Suzuki share things with each other that you might find informative. And one of the things I asked you was to share some of the things that you might have observed, seen, that you found interesting about this, in the last 3 months, 13 weeks, about the coronavirus, about COVID-19. And so here are some of the articles that you had shared. Coronavirus research updates. Swiss survey finds that children are less susceptible to infection. Okay, so someone had shared this about the, we still have an understanding that it seems that young are not as susceptible and elderly are more susceptible. But having said that, some of you found another article that said that we're actually finding that a lot of young people are getting sick. They're not necessarily dying, but they are getting sick. And because many of them have robust immune systems, they're able to battle the disease. But initially at the beginning of this, we were saying, the scientists were saying, the researchers were saying that if you're elderly, stay away from everybody. If you're young, well, we want you to distance so that you don't make people sick. But if you do get sick, it'll be okay. But we're finding that some young people are getting sick, and unfortunately, they are not able to battle back from the disease for whatever reason. So one of you shared this one. And that's June 9th, not that long ago. And we're learning about the coronavirus. So this was a coronavirus article that talked about all the things that coronavirus does to the body. Someone else shared this one. I'll have to refresh this one. Okay. People have been dying to hug. Okay, so this was Heather. Heather, you shared this one. The fact that you were saying how you are in a position where you have not been able to touch or come in close contact with certain people. And now there's people out there that are telling you if you want to hug somebody, well, this is how you do it, right? And so they've taken the time to demonstrate, show pictures, talk about what is the chance of transmissibility if you hug in a certain way. And you're right, we're social beasts, and human contact, we're learning, we've always known is incredibly important. Are we underestimating how many people are resistant to COVID-19? So we're assuming that it's going to be a virus that swipes through the population, but there are many instances of people and populations and large chunks of these large demographics that are immune to certain disorders because of a genetic resilience on that population, that local community or whatever. So is that true for COVID-19? We don't know. Maybe. Canada's big cities. So someone mentioned about the air pollution falling down dramatically. This is not how the climate change supporters wanted the reduction in air pollution to occur. And the truth is, once we roll back out of this, because these are not sustainable actions, we're talking about people who have stopped working and industries shutting down, but it isn't a long-term solution, clearly, because people are going to come back out of their homes. Businesses are going to start up at some point in the next months or several months. It's going to happen. So someone mentioned an article about coronavirus patients being flipped on their bellies. This one here, a person had noticed how the coronavirus has a bunch of symptoms that affect the respiratory system, the lungs, but it also affects other things throughout the body. And one of the common symptoms, or weird symptoms, is that some people lose their sense of smell. And that it appears to be a symptom of COVID-19. Goop. If you ever see anything from Goop or mentions Goop, that's pretty much false information. There's a Netflix special, I can't remember who the person is who promotes it in her Goop lab, but most of the things on here are nonsense. And it's packaged in a slick way that makes it look like it's true science, but in the most part, the stuff on here is actual pseudoscience. And if you are into understanding more about pseudoscience versus science, here is a great book to read. The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe: How to Know What's Really Real in a World Increasingly Full of Fake. It does an excellent job of exploring pseudoscience versus science. I just read it last week. Great read. If I had more time, we'd talk about it. Okay, and here's a contradiction. You would think that if you're smoking and vaping, that since that affects the respiratory system, that would make you more susceptible. But there's been some conflicting studies about smokers being less affected by COVID. So what's going on there? Right? So that's something that's worth a read. So those were some of the interesting shares that you had to share during last week's question of the week. This week's question of the week is focused on, well, I gave a little story about where I grew up, what my postal code was like in Scarborough, and I'm asking you how many of your opportunities are determined by the postal code in which you live. Okay, so that's this week's question of the week. Have fun, and I look forward to reading all about your shares and your stories.